It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind that carried a strange calm before a storm. I was 15, and the house felt larger than it was, echoing every sound: the creak of the wooden floors, the hum of the ceiling fan, and the soft radio playing an old tune my father liked. My father was a man of order. His world revolved around discipline, the kind that believed in silence over shouting, control over chaos. He didn't need to raise his voice to make me tremble. A single look, a pause between his words, that was enough. That day, I made a mistake. A mistake that wouldn't have mattered much in another family, but in ours, it was enough to start a storm. I had borrowed his watch. Not just any watch, his watch. A silver Seiko he bought before I was born. He called it the only thing that's ever been truly mine. I didn't mean to break it. I only wanted to wear it for one afternoon, to see what it felt like to carry a piece of him on my wrist. But when I dropped it, the sound of glass shattering felt like time itself had stopped. I stood frozen, the cracked face of the watch glinting up at me like an accusation. My pulse raced. My hand shook. I didn't know what to do, so I hid it in my drawer, hoping he'd never notice. But fathers always notice. That evening, I found him sitting in his chair, the same chair by the window where he'd read the paper every night. The light from the lamp cut across his face, one side calm, the other in shadow. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Did you wear my watch today?" My throat tightened. "No, sir." Silence. The kind that burns. He folded his paper slowly, placed it on the table, and then looked at me. His eyes didn't show anger, just something worse. Disappointment. "Go bring it to me," he said. When I opened my drawer, the weight of guilt nearly crushed me. I brought the watch to him, my hands trembling. He turned it over, examined the cracked glass, and exhaled softly. "You lied," he said. It wasn't the broken watch that hurt him. It was the lie. And I knew what was coming next, not in action, but in lesson. He stood up, tall and calm. His presence filled the room. "Sit," he said. I sat. He walked over to the window, looking out into the fading light. "Do you know what my father taught me when I was your age?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. He said that a man's worth isn't measured by how he acts when he's right. It's measured by how he admits when he's wrong. I wanted to say I was sorry, but my throat closed. My father turned around, his face unreadable. "I'm not angry you broke it. I'm angry you thought lying would make you a man." He took the broken watch, placed it on the table between us, and leaned forward. "This," he said, tapping the cracked glass, "was built to last. It survived more than you know. But one lie, one careless moment, and now it's a reminder." He paused. Then, in a voice quiet but firm, he said, "Son, discipline isn't about punishment. It's about remembering. Remembering the moments that taught you who you are." That night, I couldn't sleep. The ticking of the wall clock sounded louder than usual, like it was counting my guilt. Every second whispered what I already knew. I had lost more than a watch. I had lost a piece of him on his trust. When morning came, the sun rose pale and cold. I walked to Mr. Rafiq's repair shop, a narrow place filled with the smell of oil and dust. He looked surprised when I told him my father had sent me to work there. I spent the day sweeping floors, polishing clocks, learning how time could both be fragile and eternal. Each tick and talk reminded me of that moment, the crack, the lie, the silence that followed. And as the day ended, I realized something. My father's lesson wasn't meant to break me. It was meant to build me. Still, I wasn't ready to forgive him for the way he made me feel. Not yet. That would take years. And another mistake, an even greater one, to understand what he truly meant.
The days turned into weeks at Mr. Rafiq's clock shop. I can still remember the smell, a mix of machine oil, brass, and time itself. The walls were lined with clocks of every kind, some ancient, some broken beyond repair, others still ticking with the stubborn rhythm of survival. Every tick became a heartbeat, every talk a reminder. Mr. Rafiq was a quiet man, short and balding, with spectacles that always slid down his nose. He never asked questions, but he always seemed to know why I was there. "Your father wants you to learn time," he said once, polishing the glass of a mantel clock. "Not how to read it, how to respect it." I didn't respond. I was too busy resenting my father to understand him. Each morning, I left home before sunrise. My father never said a word. He didn't ask how the work was going. He didn't even look at me as I left. That silence? It was worse than punishment. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was empty. And in that emptiness, I felt small. At 15, pride burns hotter than guilt. I told myself I didn't care, that he had gone too far, that he didn't love me, that all he wanted was control. I remember standing in that shop one evening, wiping my hands on a dirty rag, whispering under my breath, "He doesn't understand me. He never has." But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself again. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old clock parts, I found a watch. The same model as my father's Seiko. It wasn't identical, but close enough to stir something inside me. I turned it over in my hand and imagined him wearing it, the way he used to adjust it before leaving for work. There was a dignity to him, a kind of quiet pride that I both admired and feared. When I came home that evening, I saw him sitting in the same chair, reading again. The lamplight caught the side of his face, painting it in that soft gold glow I used to find comforting. But now, it only made me uneasy. I wanted to tell him how hard I was working, how I was saving every rupee to fix the watch. I wanted to tell him I was sorry, but the words wouldn't come. He looked up, glanced at me briefly, then went back to his paper. That glance, it broke me. Because it wasn't anger anymore, it was distance. I went to my room, shut the door, and sat there in the dark, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan. The house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by the things we never said to each other. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Mr. Rafiq gave me a small envelope. Inside was a note, "For your honesty and hard work." It was signed with his shaky handwriting and contained the exact amount I needed to repair my father's watch. I remember clutching that envelope like it was gold. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to hope. That evening, I went to the repair counter, handed the money to the man, and waited as he replaced the glass. When he handed it back, the Seiko looked almost new again, except for a faint scratch near the edge, a scar that couldn't be polished away. When I reached home, my father was again at the window. I walked toward him, my hands shaking slightly as I held the watch. "I fixed it," I said. He looked up, studied the watch, then me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. "Thank you," he said quietly. That was it. No smile, no embrace, just 2 words. But those 2 words did something strange to me. They made me angry, not because he said too little, but because I realized how much I wanted more. I wanted him to tell me he was proud. I wanted him to forgive me. I wanted him to be human for once. Instead, he turned the watch over in his hands, wound it, and placed it back on his wrist as if nothing had ever happened. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept hearing his words from before. Discipline isn't about punishment. It's about remembering. I thought I understood them then. I didn't. The silence between us grew thicker after that. He wasn't cruel, but he was distant, colder somehow, as though teaching me had cost him something too. Maybe it had. Maybe every lesson a father gives takes a piece of him. A month later, I came home late from the shop and found him waiting in the dark. The lights were off, but I could see the glow of his cigarette near the window. "You're late," he said. "I was helping Mr. Rafiq close up." He nodded, but his voice had that edge, the one that cut without raising volume. "You could have called. We didn't own a phone." It was his way of saying, "You could have cared." I remember snapping that night, not loudly, but with all the quiet rage of a son who had held too much inside. "I fixed your watch. I worked every day for it. Isn't that enough?" He looked at me through the dark. "You still don't understand." "What?" I asked, almost shouting. That this was never about the watch. His words struck something deep inside me, something I didn't want to face. I wanted to be right. I wanted to believe that he was just being strict, just being stubborn. But as I looked at him, the cigarette glow dying between his fingers, I saw something else: weariness. That night, he didn't lecture me. He didn't even speak again. He just turned away and went to his room. And that silence? It felt heavier than any punishment he had ever given me. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last real conversation we'd have for months. The distance that grew after that became a kind of quiet battlefield. He believed I needed to learn. I believed he would never understand me. And between those two beliefs, love was buried, waiting for the day one of us would finally dig it out again.
It's strange how silence can grow into a language of its own. In our house, it spoke louder than words ever could. After that night, my father and I began living like strangers who happened to share walls. He read his paper in the same chair every evening. I walked past him every morning, pretending to be in a hurry. Our eyes met, sometimes, only for a second, and both of us would look away, as if afraid of what might spill out if we didn't. But I could still feel his presence everywhere. In the order of things, the untouched newspaper folded neatly on the table, the faint smell of tobacco in the air, the watch ticking quietly on his wrist, the same watch I had fixed. I had given him back time, but we had lost something else. Mr. Rafiq noticed the change in me. One afternoon, while I was adjusting the gears of an old wall clock, he said softly, "A father's silence isn't the absence of love. Sometimes it's the only way he knows how to keep from breaking." I didn't answer. I just tightened the screw until it refused to move. He watched me for a while before continuing. "You remind me of your father, you know. The same pride, the same loneliness." His words stayed with me long after the shop closed. I walked home that night under the dim orange streetlights, each step heavy with confusion. Maybe he was right. Maybe pride ran through us like an inheritance neither of us wanted, but both refused to let go of. When I reached home, the house was dark, except for the light from my father's room. The door was slightly open. I could hear the sound of a faint cough. For a moment, I stood there, hesitating. Then I pushed the door open a little more. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a glass of water beside him. His face looked older than I remembered, not weaker, just quieter. He didn't notice me. His eyes were fixed on the old photo frame on his table, the one with my mother's picture. She died when I was 10. I'd almost forgotten how gentle she looked in that photograph, wearing the same soft smile she used to calm both of us with. He reached out, touched the frame gently, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he adjusted his watch, as he always did, and sighed. I left before he could see me, but something inside me shifted that night. For the first time, I saw him not as the man who punished me, but as someone still carrying his own ghosts.
The next few weeks passed in uneasy peace. I began to notice the small ways he tried to reach out. A cup of tea left on my desk before dawn, my uniform ironed and folded neatly even when I hadn't asked. He never said anything, but the silence began to soften, like frost melting at the edge of winter. One Sunday morning, I found him repairing the old transistor radio that had stopped working years ago. He was sitting by the window, screwdriver in hand, surrounded by screws and wires. Without thinking, I sat beside him. He glanced at me, surprised, then handed me a small piece of wire. "Hold this," he said. I held it. And for a few minutes, we worked together, in complete silence. Two people bound not by words, but by the rhythm of an old radio coming back to life. When the music finally crackled through, he gave a small nod, almost a smile. "Sometimes all a thing needs is patience," he said. I knew he wasn't talking about the radio. That evening, I walked to the small playground near our street, the same one where he used to take me when I was a child. I sat on the rusty swing and thought about how time had turned him from a giant into a man, and me from a boy into someone who finally saw the cracks in his armor. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't even gentle. But maybe he was never supposed to be. Maybe fathers like him were forged in a time when love was expressed through labor, not language, through provision, not praise. Still, I couldn't help but wish for a single moment of softness, a single "I'm proud of you." Then came the night everything changed. I was working late at the shop when a boy ran in, breathless. "Your father's collapsed," he said. The wrench fell from my hand. I don't remember locking the shop or how I ran the whole way home. All I remember is the sound of my heartbeat, pounding in my ears louder than any clock I'd ever heard. When I reached, he was lying on the floor beside his chair. His watch was still ticking. The doctor said it was exhaustion, too much strain, not enough rest. He would recover, but slowly. For days, I stayed by his side, listening to that steady tick of the Seiko. Sometimes I would check it just to feel the rhythm of something still alive, something we both shared. He didn't talk much, but he didn't have to. One evening, as I was adjusting his pillow, he said quietly, "You've grown, haven't you?" I froze. Those words, they were simple, but they felt like an apology, an admission, and a confession all at once. "I'm trying," I said softly. He nodded, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Good. Keep trying." That night, I sat beside him long after he fell asleep. The room was filled with the sound of his breathing and the faint ticking of the watch. I realized then that the silence that once haunted me had changed. It wasn't punishment anymore. It was understanding. It was peace. After he recovered, things between us weren't perfect, but they were honest. We still didn't talk much, but when we did, it mattered. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me leave for work, his eyes softer than before. Sometimes he'd place his hand on my shoulder. No words, no advice, just presence. And that was enough. Years later, when I moved out and started my own life, I carried that same watch with me, its faint scratch still there, its tick still steady. Every time I wound it, I felt the weight of everything he'd tried to teach me. That love doesn't always sound like comfort, and lessons don't always come dressed as kindness. Some lessons, like silence, have to echo for years before you finally understand them.
It's been almost 20 years since I left that house, yet sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint ticking of his watch in my dreams. The sound doesn't haunt me anymore, it comforts me. Back then, I used to think silence was punishment, that my father's way of raising me was built on walls, not bridges. But age has a cruel way of softening the truth, of showing you that the monsters you ran from were only men trying their best to love you with the tools they had. I'm a father now,
And some nights, when my son disobeys me, I catch myself pausing mid-sentence, remembering the way my father would tighten his jaw, breathe in through his nose, and say nothing. That silence used to burn me. Now it humbles me, because I understand what it meant. It wasn't emptiness. It was control. It was the sound of a man fighting against the violence of his own upbringing. He had grown up under harder hands, I later learned. My uncle told me once, over tea and old memories, that their father, my grandfather, was a man carved out of duty and anger. He never spoke to his sons except to correct them. He believed affection was weakness. So my father built himself from that mold and tried, in his own broken way, to be different. But breaking a pattern takes more strength than a man like him ever learned to name. Maybe that's why he stayed silent, because every word he wanted to say came tangled in the echoes of his own father's voice. After his death, I found his things boxed neatly in the attic. There were tools, old photographs, and the watch, still ticking, still alive in a way he no longer was. Inside the box was also a letter I'd never seen before. It wasn't addressed to me. It was written to himself. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded. His handwriting was sharp, careful, like the man himself. It read, "A man must learn to be firm but not cruel. My father never learned that difference. I try every day not to repeat him, though sometimes I fear I already have. Maybe the boy will understand one day that my silence was the only kindness I knew how to give." I remember reading those words over and over until they blurred. It was the first time in my life I saw him, not as the man who raised me, but as a human being trying to unlearn pain. That night, I sat by the attic window, watching the rain bleed across the glass, and I wept like the child I never allowed myself to be. For years, I had carried anger like inheritance. I blamed him for everything, my anxiety, my distance, my fear of making mistakes. But that letter cracked something open. I realized that maybe, in his quiet way, he had been apologizing all along. Through the things he fixed, the chores he did for me, the cups of tea he left by my desk. Love doesn't always need words. Sometimes it hides in the rhythm of routine, in silence that means I'm still here. Now, when I look at my own son, I think about the boy I was, the one who wanted so badly to be seen, to be heard, to be forgiven. I promised myself I wouldn't repeat my father's mistakes, but parenting has a strange way of humbling promises. Last year, my son lied to me. It wasn't a big lie, just one of those childish things that sting more because of what they represent. I was furious at first. My voice rose, my heart pounded, and for a second, I felt the old shadow of my father behind me. Then I stopped. I looked into my son's eyes, wide, scared, searching for the same understanding I once needed, and I saw myself. So I didn't shout. I didn't punish him. I just said, quietly, "Come here." He hesitated, then came closer. I put my hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Tell me why." He broke down crying, said he was scared I'd be disappointed. And in that moment, I realized the cycle could end right there, between us. Because maybe that's the real lesson my father left me, that you don't heal by forgetting what broke you. You heal by learning how not to pass it on. Sometimes I visit his grave. It's a small plot near the old fig tree behind the town's mosque. The air always smells faintly of dust and nostalgia. I sit there and talk to him, not out loud, just in my mind. I tell him about my life, about the son who now looks at me the way I once looked at him, about how I finally understand what silence costs and what it saves. I tell him I forgive him. And sometimes when the wind moves through the leaves, I imagine him answering, not with words, but with the same quiet strength that once ruled our home. I think he'd be proud, not of what I've achieved, but of what I've learned to unlearn. That's the irony, isn't it? We spend our youth trying to escape our parents only to realize that every step forward is still traced by their shadows. But the difference lies in what we do with that shadow, whether we let it darken us or define us. For me, his shadow became something else, a kind of guide, a reminder that even silence, when born from love, can teach lessons that last a lifetime. When I wind his watch now, I listen closely to the tick. Each sound is a heartbeat, steady, patient, eternal. It doesn't speak, it doesn't explain, it just endures. And maybe that's what my father was trying to teach me all along. That discipline isn't about control, it's about endurance, the quiet strength to hold yourself together when the world expects you to break. That lesson took me years to understand, and maybe that's okay, because some lessons aren't meant to be learned quickly. They're meant to echo, through years, through silence, through the steady pulse of a watch that never stops ticking.